next tutorial. This will be about painting with air, using the fill tool, or using what people often call putty. So air in Landmark is made of voxels as well, but it behaves slightly differently from the solid voxels. You cannot copy and paste air on its own, although you can copy it if you are also copying a solid voxel. And you can, in fact, paste air with your solid voxels, or there's an option to paste it without. If I copy and paste this voxel, if I do it in tweak mode, holding down Control and left clicking, I get the tweak mode menu up, and you'll see there's a tick mark, paste air with voxels, yes or no. And if yes, and if I had selected air as well as my voxel, then that air would be pasted as well. I can also, by the way, paste it as negative, but that is something we'll deal with later. So we'll ignore that for now. So here is a normal voxel floating in the air, and here's a slightly smaller than usual voxel, also floating in the air. This is the default size of voxel, so all of the air voxels around it will just be normal cubes, the default shape of a voxel, like the one we can see. However, this one, which is smaller than usual, has been changed in shape from its default cube, which means that the air voxels around it will also have been forced to change shape. As we saw in the previous tutorial, all voxels are connected to their 26 neighbors either by a corner or a side or an edge. And anything that affects one voxel also affects its neighbors. So how can we visualize that? Well, sometimes to understand what's happening to the air, it can be useful to be able to actually see it. And there's a couple ways we can do that. We can actually paint the air. And this is a fairly recent feature to Landmark, but I'm going to use the selection tool here in tweak mode again, which I'm doing by holding down Control, and then I'm moving it just one sideways from the shrunken voxel here. Now I use my add tool, and you can see in the modal toolbar a number of options pop up depending which tool I have selected. These will give you hints and shortcuts on what else you can do with that tool in a more advanced mode, so it's definitely worth looking through these and trying them out. In this case, in the add tool, there's an option here. The E key is the shortcut, fill. I'll select that, and I will select the selection volume, which I have floating in the air there, and that will fill that selected area with paint, my current paint color being white. What that's done is it's actually colored the voxel that I have selected, but it has not changed its shape. So what you can see here is that I have a sort of cone shape, which connects to the side of my small voxel here, and then on this far side it's just a normal cube, like a normal voxel shape. And if I switch to a different color, let me choose ice, which is see-through. You can see the two voxels quite separately there. If I were to select, again, tweak mode by holding down Control, select one up at the corner that would be attached to the edge of the small voxel and do the same thing, add tool, E to fill, you can see the air that I've painted with ice here. Again, the edge that it shares with this small voxel is always attached because this small voxel has been shrunk. It's forced the air voxel, or what was air and is now ice, to be pulled in, and to keep the edge aligned, it's made it as small on that edge as our white voxel is. So that helps you visualize what's happening. If I were to copy this small voxel and the air around it, or even just part of the air around it, I would be copying air that's been changed in shape. You just need to be aware that that can happen when you paste this down again, that the air that's included in your selection can affect the voxels that it is placed next to. This can cause what you paste it next to be deformed, which you may want to avoid, and you can also use it to your advantage in some situations. But either way, it's important to just be aware of it. There is another method of painting air which was actually discovered by players before we added this fill functionality. I'm just going to hit undo to remove those. So there we're back to, oops, where we started. And players tend to call this putty, as in like the stuff that you fill it between tiles with. But what it is just a technique of copying the painting material only onto a voxel and not copying any of the shapes. You make this by taking some completely default ground, like the game-generated terrain, which we call procedural terrain, the untouched game voxels, or you can just select some of the land on your claim if you're not sure if it's original or not. Just use the heal tool, a little green band-aid, and heal it, and that will restore it to default. So now we know that area, and I did go down a few voxels deep as well because we need a couple voxels deep. That is default terrain. It will all be perfectly square, and it will all be essentially the way it was when the world was created. So what I'm going to do is use my select tool, and I'm actually going to make it too high, and then I'm going to sink it down into the ground, so now it's too deep. And I'm going to paint it with the paint tool, a little blue brush, like that. Now I don't actually want this one at the top, because it may not be completely pristine since it's in contact with the air. What I want is the one down below it, which is surrounded entirely by those voxels that I healed. Because they are default game-generated terrain at this point, they don't have any specified shape. All they have now is the ice paint texture, which I painted them with. So when I copy this voxel underneath the surface, what I'm going to get in my copy brush is only the paint material and no shape. When I paste that over any other voxel, what it will do is apply only my paint color, but it won't affect the shape, just the way the fill tool did earlier. So let me demonstrate. You can see it behaved exactly like the fill tool. And I can use that to visualize what the air is doing without in any way changing the shape. And I don't just have to use that on air. I can paint anything with it that is currently a voxel. I can paint the ground, whatever. The difference between this and the fill tool is that the fill tool, or the fill option of the add tool, is only going to fill air. It will not paint in this fashion anything else. Putty, however, you can use to color any voxel, so you can use it on more things. One useful thing to do with this, and I would recommend doing this, is go back, reselect the one below, and then make a template of it. Open your template window and create new, and just call it something you'll find again, like putty voxel. Oops, and spell it right. Screenshot's not going to be very interesting. And then hit create, and then you don't have to go through this step again. You can just pull it out of your templates and place it. It will retain its properties. Another thing that you might want to do is actually make a grid shape. You don't have to do just a single one. Remember, when I'm doing this, I'm using the paint tool, not the add tool. The add tool will not work here, because the add tool will actually add voxels, which will change the shape of it, which defeats the purpose of what you're doing here. And if I pick a different color, such as not the plaster here, I can make a little grid. selection volume down one and paste that. That is now a small grid of putty. If I were to place that on top of this small voxel over here, using tweak mode again to line this up correctly because it can be a little difficult sometimes. Alright, so that should be exactly aligned on that. Confirm, and you can see it applied the entire grid to the air and the voxel, and you can see all in one what everything around it is doing. Just a little handy if you want to see what more than one voxel at a time is doing.